All right, so are you ready to dive into some seriously strange stuff today?
Always. Hit me with it.
All right, so you guys sent us a ton of stuff on Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation, Facebook posts, forum threads, even some article snippets and pieces of PDFs. It's wild.
Yeah, this is a big one for sure. It's pretty fascinating stuff, actually. The deeper we go, the more contradictions pop up.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Like, where do we even start with this? Okay, let's start simple. Who is this Chris Butler guy?
Well, at first glance, it seems pretty straightforward, right?
Right.
Founder of SIF, former student of A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, the founder of the Hare Krishna movement, ISKCon.
Okay, sure. Makes sense.
But then things get a little weird.
Okay, lay it on me. What happens?
He decides to take the name Siddhaswarapananda, embraces sannyasa, which is basically a life of renunciation, and then he gets married.
Wait a second, hold on. He goes from a life of giving up everything to tying the knot?
It's a pretty unusual move, right? Especially when you think about the whole renunciation thing. It really makes you question how Butler is actually interpreting and applying these principles within Seth.
Yeah, that's not your typical spiritual leader move. Is this where all those red flags you guys sent in start waving like crazy?
Pretty much. And it doesn't stop there. While Seth wants to seem all peaceful and aligned with the Hare Krishna movement, promoting yoga meditation, vegetarianism, all that good stuff,
Yeah.
some of your sources, they don't hold back.
Really?
Oh, yeah. They call it Butler's sect, or even straight up a cult.
Whoa, cult. That's a heavy word. What makes them say that?
Well, there are a ton of allegations and controversies swirling around Butler and Seth, and we're going to get into all of that. Some of them have to do with money, claiming Butler is basically hoarding donations and maybe even making a profit off some shady stuff his followers were allegedly involved in.
Shady stuff. Like, what are we talking about here? Give me the details.
We're talking drug trafficking, pyramid schemes, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Pretty intense, right?
Seriously. The guy who's supposed to be all about renouncing worldly possessions is mixed up in get-rich-quick schemes.
Yeah, that's definitely leaning into the whole cult vibe. What else are these people saying?
There are also some disturbing accusations of abuse of power within Seth, like Butler punishing followers for tiny little things demanding absolute obedience, even breaking up families.
Seriously, that doesn't sound very peaceful or spiritual to me.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up. And these accusations of financial and personal control, they're coming from a lot of former members, especially in those online forum posts you sent.
Okay, before we move on, we've got to talk about this one, even though it sounds completely bonkers. Some sources talk about this ritualistic thing where people drink Butler's foot bath water and eat his toenail clippings.
Yeah, that's one of the weirder details that keeps popping up, especially from ex-members. It's hard to wrap your head around, but it's definitely a recurring theme in these sources.
Okay, toenail clippings. Seriously, can we unpack that a little? What's the deal with that? Well, the concept of Mahaprastham is central to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. It's the idea that food offered to the deity becomes spiritually charged.
Okay, I kind of remember that.
Some sources are suggesting that these rituals stem from the belief that Butler himself holds that same level of spiritual significance, like a deity.
Well, hold on. Are you saying they think Butler is on the same level as a god? Like his toenail clippings are holy relics or something?
That seems to be the implication, and it definitely goes against traditional Hare Krishna practices where offerings are made to the deities, not to the guru.
Yeah, no kidding. This is where that whole Sahajiya thing comes in.
Exactly. It's a term used in Gaudiya Vaishnavism to describe people who deviate from the traditional teachings and practices, often mixing spiritual concepts in ways that are considered inappropriate or even heretical.
Okay, so are these sources saying Butler is a Sahajiya?
That's the big debate.
Yeah.
They point to a bunch of things, like his mixing Kundalini yoga with Gaudiya Vaishnava practices, maybe misinterpreting tantric principles, and of course breaking his sannyasa vows by getting married.
So we've got this organization that's putting on a peaceful, yoga-loving front, but then behind the scenes there are these serious accusations of exploitation control and rituals that just sound bizarre.
It's definitely a complicated picture.
Yeah.
But before we go jumping to conclusions, we need to remember that we're looking at multiple perspectives here.
Right. Some of these sources, like those ex-member forums, are coming from a place of anger and hurt.
Definitely.
Others, like those news articles you have, are trying to stay neutral. And then there are some that are even defending Butler and Saif.
This is where you have to put on your critical thinking cap.
Absolutely.
As we dig deeper into these sources, we need to think about the potential biases behind each viewpoint. Ex-members might be holding on to resentment, while SIFE representatives obviously want to protect their leader and the organization.
It's like a puzzle where everyone has a different version of the story and we have to figure out what really happened. But there's one more piece to this puzzle that we haven't talked about yet. Tulsi Gabbard, the politician, she considers Butler to be her guru.
That's right. And that connection adds another layer to this whole investigation.
So we've talked about some pretty serious accusations against Chris Butler and Seth. Let's dive into those a bit more. We got to start with the whole money situation. Some people are saying Butler demands these huge donations from his followers and even fines them for little things.
You're right. Some sources talk about this system where followers can get fined for being late, not following instructions exactly, that sort of thing.
Okay, I get it, like a spiritual parking ticket. But wouldn't some people say that kind of discipline is normal in a spiritual community? What do your sources say about how members feel about these fines?
It's a mixed bag, really. Some ex-members say they felt pressured, like they had to give more than they could afford, but then others claim it was a way to purify themselves, show their commitment.
So it's not as simple as saying Butler is just using his followers for money. It sounds like there are different interpretations within the group.
Yeah, exactly. And it gets even more complicated when you factor in the allegations that Butler pressures followers
Yeah.
to give up all their assets. I'm talking money, property, intellectual property, everything to the organization.
Wow, that's next level. It's giving me major cult leader vibes,
Right.
hoarding all the wealth. But doesn't that go against the whole Gaudiya Vaishnava thing about renouncing material possessions?
It definitely seems to contradict those principles. A lot of sources point this out when they accuse Butler of being a hypocrite. He's acting like this spiritual guide who's above material desires, but then his actions seem to tell a different story.
It's like do as I say, not as I do, but on a guru level. This brings us back to that whole Sahajiya thing. You said that often involves twisting or misinterpreting Tantra. So is Butler using those teachings to justify what he's doing?
That's what a lot of people are trying to figure out. Tantra is a really complex system that's often misunderstood. There's so many different practices and beliefs, and it's easy to get things wrong if you take them out of context.
It's like a buffet. You got to be careful what you pick and choose. Some sources are saying Butler is focusing on the parts of Tantra that let him justify accumulating all this wealth.
Right, which totally clashes with the whole point of Tantra, which is spiritual liberation, not material gain.
Yeah, it seems like he's twisting things to fit his own agenda. Okay, so let's switch gears for a second and talk about the manipulation and control happening within Seth. Some of the accounts from ex-members are really scary. They describe Butler as this controlling figure who wants absolute obedience and punishes anyone who disagrees. They even talk about him breaking up families, turning spouses against each other, and isolating followers from their loved ones.
These are incredibly serious accusations, and they shouldn't be ignored. And they fit the pattern of classic cult behavior, relying on isolation and control to maintain influence.
Like they break you down and rebuild you in their image so you become completely dependent on the group. And it sounds like Butler might be using his position as a guru to take advantage of that.
That's a key element in a lot of cult situations, the abuse of power. When you have someone who's seen as a spiritual authority, it creates this imbalance. Followers are taught to trust their guru without question, to surrender their own will and judgment. And that makes them incredibly vulnerable to being manipulated.
Oh, this is all starting to sound really messed up. But can we go back to those weird rituals for a minute? The foot bath water, the toenail clippings. Is there anything else in your sources that can explain why they're doing these things?
It's tough to say for sure without hearing from current SES members, but some sources suggest these practices are seen as a way to receive Butler's spiritual energy or blessings.
So they're basically saying even his bodily fluids are sacred. That's taking the whole Mahaprasadam concept to a whole other level.
It definitely seems that way, and it's a big departure from traditional Gaudiya Vaishnava practices, where the focus is on offering food to the deity, not consuming stuff from a guru's hygiene routine.
Right, it's a whole other level of devotion, or maybe delusion, as you said before. But what does all this mean for someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who sees Butler as her guru? Does it make us see her political positions and actions differently?
Now, that's the million-dollar question, and it's one we're going to explore in the last part of our investigation.
All right, so we've gone pretty deep into this whole Chris Butler and Sif thing, right? We've talked about all the contradictions, the allegations, the weird practices. But there's still this one piece we need to figure out. Tulsi Gabbard and her connection to Butler as her guru.
This is a sensitive topic, and it's important to approach it carefully. We're not here to criticize anyone's faith or anything like that.
Right.
But we do need to understand how someone's beliefs might affect their actions, especially if they're in a position of power like a politician.
I mean, think about it. Does knowing all this stuff about Sif and Butler change how you see Gabbard? Does it make you question her judgment or her leadership?
Those are some good questions to ask. I mean, if someone's guru is being accused of exploiting people and being controlling, you have to wonder if that could spill over into other parts of their life,
It's
right?
exactly. It's not about judging her faith, but it's about understanding how it could affect her decisions and priorities as a public figure.
And it goes beyond Gabbard herself.
Yeah.
Sif, despite all the controversy, has a history of getting involved in politics.
Yeah.
Remember those early attempts to create a political party? It makes you think that they want to influence policy and shape the world according to their beliefs.
And based on what we've learned, that's kind of a scary thought.
Yeah, it definitely raises some concerns. And this is where critical thinking is super important as citizens, as voters. It's our responsibility to be informed, to really look into the beliefs and affiliations of the people we're voting for.
So it's not about saying someone's bad just because they're part of a certain group, but it's more about asking how being part of that group might affect their choices and actions.
Exactly. This whole investigation has taken us down a rabbit hole, right?
Hmm.
There are so many contradictions, allegations, and practices that raise more questions than answers.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think we've stumbled upon something really valuable.
Oh, really? What's that?
The power of questioning. Refusing to just take things at face value and actually digging deeper, looking at different perspectives. Those are skills that will help you no matter what you're exploring.
I love that. We started this deep dive wanting to understand Chris Butler's stuff and all the drama surrounding them, and I think we've done that to some extent.
Yeah, and more importantly, we've engaged in critical thinking. Examining sources, considering biases, and coming to our own conclusions based on the evidence.
And that's something we should all be doing.
Absolutely. So for those listening, what does all this mean for you? Maybe you're leaving with more questions than answers, or maybe you're feeling a little uneasy or even disturbed by what you've heard.
Yeah, that's understandable.
It's okay to feel uncomfortable. Sometimes they can actually help us grow and understand things better.
Exactly. You've been given a glimpse into this world that most people probably don't even know exists. Now it's up to you to decide what you do with that knowledge.
Right. Do you do more research? Seek at different perspectives, challenge your own assumptions.
These are all things we should be asking ourselves all the time.
The search for knowledge never ends. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and never be afraid to delve into the unknown.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, folks, that's another deep dive in the books. Thanks for coming along with us on this wild ride. Until next time, keep those minds curious and keep those questions coming.